upload. Welcome everyone to the September 29th, 2020 Open Planetary Lunch Talk. I don't have lunch today, I have some tea though. Our speaker today I'm very excited about, Arfon Smith. We'll be talking about the Journal of Open Source Software. I believe the first journal of this type. It's exciting, and it has also exploded. Many of us have published there. So whenever you are ready, Arfon, please just start talking.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the invite today. I don't get to talk about JOSS a huge amount, so it's always nice to talk to a new audience about the journal. So yeah, so thanks in advance. Just I guess a quick procedural thing. I actually have the Zoom chat in front of me on my main screen, so I have about 30 minutes of material probably, so but I'm happy to be interrupted, so if you want to ask a question as I'm talking, I will try and keep an eye on the chat in Zoom and try and respond, try and fold in, you know, the question and response into what I'm talking about. So feel free to ask questions as I go. Also, you know, feel free to say questions for the end, that's fine too. Yeah, so let's talk about the Journal of Open Source Software, or JOSS, as we refer to it as a team. This group of people here, this list of names, is the list of past and present editors. We currently have, I think, 54 editors. There's about 70 names on this screen, so about 15 editors over the last 4 years have sort of come and gone for a bunch of reasons. But yeah, we're up to about 50 or so editors today, and you know, as I think will become clear during my talk today, you know, a project like JOSS, that's essentially a community run project, essentially relies upon, you know, the goodwill and the time and the efforts of a group of volunteers, and so, you know, none of what I show today would be possible without the editors and the reviewers and of course authors submitting to the journal. So let's get stuck in. And I have to, the obligatory credit to funders as well. So we've had some funding from Moore Foundation, from Sloan, relatively modest amounts to date. We're also a affiliate of the Open Source Initiative, and we're part of NumFocus. I should also say we inherited our review process originally from a project called OpenSci, which some of you might know. If you don't, I encourage you to look it up. There's also an equivalent project called PyOpenSci these days, which is a sort of community of researchers who are reviewing software for their communities. So we've got, you know, built on the shoulders of all those folks. Okay, so, you know, why does JOSS exist? Fundamentally, JOSS exists because software is important to the work that we do in research. This is not a statement without, you know, some evidence. There's been a number of surveys of the literature of authors over the years. One in 2009 surveyed a few thousand scientists, and more than 90% of those people reported that software was either important or very important to their work. There was a pretty large survey of UK researchers that said, you know, that basically their research would not be possible without software. So, you know, we sort of know this, especially people who sort of do any kind of computational research. We know software is an important part of what we do. But it's, you know, it's really critical to modern research in many fields. So this is you know, this is a reason to worry about software and its role in academia. Also, software is kind of everywhere. This is, you know, not, again, I don't think as a controversial statement. This is a statement that my employer GitHub would like me to reinforce. You know, software is everywhere and is part of a lot of industries these days. I like the phrasing by Gail Barraco from scikit-learn, who has this nice way of capturing sort of the variety of ways in which we can think about software. Turns a theoretical model into a quantitative prediction, software controls an experiment, software extracts from raw data evidence supporting or rejecting a theory. You know, software is just everywhere in the life cycle of you know, computational research. And so, you know, for something like astronomy, you know, it could be expressed in the form of libraries that get used in notebooks. We could talk about whether notebooks are software themselves. I think that's an interesting conversation if you're interested in that. But it's everywhere in certainly astronomy, planetary science. But in terms of like thinking about next generation hardware for doing genome sequencing, these are obviously you have a piece of hardware here that's doing the sequencing. In this case, it's called a nanopore. But the smarts of the system beyond the original design of the sort of molecule interface here is all of the supporting software that allows bioinformaticians to derive insights from the data. Of course, in things like astronomy and astrophysics, this is the Millennium simulation. Some software and a lot of CPU that allows for many people to pile in on that. But I think my best example of software sort of being everywhere is John Deere. Actually, I don't know if folks know this story, but really these days John Deere consider themselves as much a hardware company as a software company. The software that controls this farm hardware that the farmers use to control and their crop process is incredibly important to what they do, and is actually the thing that differentiates a lot of the sort of experience of their users. And so this is sort of a long way of getting to quite a famous phrase in the sort of tech world, which is software is eating the world. There's a famous quote by Mark Andreessen about this, and it's a statement of just about software growing and dominating industries across all sectors, but it's also a statement about open source as well, and that open source is becoming sort of dominant in many industries as well. So this is all good. This is great, except and this kind of gets to some of the purpose of JOSS, really. The software work that one might do as an academic is not universally traditionally recognized in academia. So we said that software is everywhere. It's incredibly important. It's important in lots of sectors, but the people doing this work are not necessarily having a great time in academia, especially if instead of writing papers, you choose to invest in software, for example. And Jake van der Plas, who some of you may know him by name, when he wrote this quote, he was working at UW. He now works at Google, so I guess that's the punchline. The skills required to be a successful scientific researcher are increasingly indistinguishable from the skills required to be successful in industry. And so this is a challenge for our universities. This is a challenge for academia, that we're sort of systematically right now making some of the most valuable members of a research group, namely people who might turn methods, theoretical methods into code that can be implemented. We're not rewarding folks typically for that work very well. They might not have a particularly good scientific career, and yet at the same time they're becoming incredibly employable. And so, as Andrew said in chat just now, this is fundamentally a brain drain problem where people are slipping off to industry. So another way to think about this, Phil Bourne, who these days is at the University of Virginia, he was at NIH, I think, when he wrote this. He said, we must find a way to legitimize software as a form of scholarship and credit that work. And so, software is everywhere, but the mechanisms for career credit are lacking. And this gets to the kind of purpose of JOSS. And so, software currently is not a universally creditable activity. And let's talk a little bit about why that is. Well, some of the challenges are technical, and some of them are really much more sort of cultural. And so, a lot of the ways that we talk about sharing our work, especially if we are writing papers, a lot of the sort of publishing and credit systems that are in place are about papers and their citations. And so some of that there are some technical challenges with thinking about how to include software in the sort of publishing ecosystem. And then there are some sort of cultural practices that might be missing or not as mature as they could be. So for example, software methods, data, associated with a paper in a journal, often these don't get even looked at very closely by a reviewer. People might just focus on the paper as something to review. So, as communities, we generally don't have, necessarily particularly mature peer review processes. There are some technical challenges around indexing. Even if you did cite software, would it be counted by the indexers? And actually, Michael, I think I misspoke. You said citing software is not a cultural issue. I think you're probably right. It's that it isn't easily citable. I think my point is that there is some work that needs to be done by the people who sort of count citations. I'm thinking of like ADS, that kind of thing, or if your journals are published in and indexed in things like Web of Science and Google Scholar, then just fitting software into the system is non-trivial. And some of these barriers are technical, some of them are cultural. So there are a couple of ways that I generally think about how to better recognize software contributions in academia. And broadly, I think about this in two different ways. One is that you find some way to fit software, even though this might not be great, but into the current system. So you say, a system that's built for papers, books, proceedings from conferences, that kind of thing. That's the sort of one approach. The other is to evolve beyond this essentially one-dimensional credit model we have in most research fields today, especially in science, which is write a paper, people cite it, papers are the sort of currency of research, and this is the other way people generally think about this. And so there are people working on all parts of this. So there's a group called Force 11 that think about the future of scholarly infrastructure. They've done a lot of work on sort of thinking about how could you natively cite software in the literature? What would a software citation look like? How would you index them? That kind of thing. You might need to make your software more easily citable. So maybe some of you have used Zenodo or something like Figshare to get a DOI for that points to maybe a repository with the software in. There's a few different ways to come at this. And then even if you did all that, you'd still need to sort of lobby and lean on indexers like ADS or Scopus or Web of Science or the like to count those citations. So there are some challenges there. Just a brief pause on sort of why we cite. I think this is sometimes we don't talk about this enough. The reasons to cite others and other people's work is actually, there are a number of reasons. These are probably the top four, but I think as academics we often think about it in this way, that it's like citation is credit, it is a currency of credit. And so really when we think about JOSS, we're really trying to make that kind of pathway to citation credit as straightforward as possible. So the other thing I said, you could do, try and fit software into the existing system, or you can try and evolve beyond this sort of single one-dimensional credit model that we have with around papers and their citation. And this actually applies more generally to data, software, protocols. If you're in a some kind of lab environment and a protocol is valuable, there's lots of things that you would want to cite beyond just papers, of course. And one example solution, this is just a toy solution really, this has not ever been implemented by anybody, this is just something that a guy called Dan Katz wrote up, was this idea of transitive credit. So just to give you an idea of what this could look like, so let's imagine I've written a paper, and this is transitive credit in sort of visual form. I've written a paper, and across in my references I want to cite, I'm probably going to cite my last paper that I wrote, because obviously, self-citation is a thing. I'm going to cite Jones as well, who, that was an important paper in my thinking here. But I'm a cosmologist. I'm going to also cite these two data sets. So maybe these are survey papers, or maybe both. So I'm going to cite data here as well, data products, wherever they live. And I'm also going to cite some software that was really important in this work. And so this is this idea that you could cite more things, but then you might say you had a unit of citation credit that you could award across all of the things that you cite. This is the idea of transitive credit, that you would say, well, I want to apply, you know, a third of the value of all of my citations to this paper here and 20% to AstroPi, that kind of thing. This is the idea behind transitive credit. And the idea is, of course, that you could then, why is it transitive? Because AstroPi itself would then potentially cite, you know, other things, other software packages. And this idea being that, you know, the sort of, in fact, credit and citation is a transitive property. In fact, we just don't represent it that way. And so people have researched this, thought about it. It turns out it's really hard. And it's hard for a bunch of quite different reasons. Some of them are about individuals. So, you know, if you're trying to change a system, you need to, you know, you need to get into the headspace of authors, you know, reviewers, editors. You need to fundamentally rethink the way you work, as Michael's saying. This sounds like a nightmare. I agree. This is not something you would do by hand. It's complex, but I would argue it would give a better description of the constituent parts that went into research. You know, you have to think about the way that editorial teams work and how publishers and journals work. You have to change the indexes. You have to change basically everything to go beyond just papers citing other papers. It's hard. And so actually, when starting JOSS, I was working on this problem at some level. I worked a bit with Dan on transitive credit. We were also working in Force 11 together on software citation. And we kind of had this idea. We're like, what if we just, you know, what if we just focused on the software papers side of this? What if we just kind of avoided all these problems? So let's talk about software papers briefly. So a software paper is a paper that is about a piece of software, right, fundamentally. So the nice things about software papers are that it gives you something easy to cite. We know how to cite papers. We know what that looks like. We know how to count those citations to papers. We know how to do all that stuff. By writing papers about software, there's no changes required to any of the parts of the scholarly infrastructure and ecosystem that we rely upon. And actually, in fact, publishing a paper about software in your favorite journal that everybody already reads, you know, that can be a very good venue to advertise software, for example. So, you know, there's lots of good reasons to do that. Some less good things about software papers, you know, if it's another paper that you've got to write, well, that can be more work. If you've already written a nice piece of software and you've written great documentation, maybe you don't want to write another software. You don't want to write another paper. Maybe you shouldn't have to. Actually, lots of journals don't accept software papers. This is less true in certainly astronomy these days. I'm less sure about planetary sciences. The difference between software and a paper, so, you know, roughly speaking, authorship is static for a paper. You know, it gets locked in once you publish, but authorship is not static generally for long-lived software, so there's some problems there. And so if you then maybe think about, well, maybe we'll publish a new paper for every major release of a software package, you then get into weird problems like citation dilution and which paper should you cite and that kind of stuff. And so it kind of gets a bit weird. So there are some problems too. So actually, one thing I would point out is, for example, the American Astronomical Society actually has pretty evolved thinking on this topic, and they actually have a very good software paper policy. They basically will allow authors to publish papers about software in I think all of their journals, and the need not include research results, I think, is particularly important, because that then speaks to the sort of, you know, this is really software, this is describing the software, and we don't need to include results too. Oh, good. So apparently this policy translates to the new Planetary Science Journal, so excellent. So, you know, JOSS fundamentally is about embracing this hack. Like, what if we made it as easy as possible to write software papers, recognizing that really kind of forcing software into a paper format is essentially hacking the system. You're saying, I have a piece of software, but I'm going to write a paper about it so I can so I can experience the benefits of being, you know, citations being counted, that kind of thing. So this is what JOSS is. And so, you know, when we were thinking about starting it, we came up with this line about it being developer friendly. And so that, broadly speaking, means if you're sort of engineering or you have a sort of developer bent to you, then it feels like a sort of dev-like experience. So we use GitHub, for example, for reviews, that kind of thing. The idea was, and this goes back to that, you know, it being real work to write a new paper. The idea being that we would accept really quite short papers. The original idea was that people might publish the sort of README file associated with their project. It's generally a little bit more content than that, but the idea is fairly safe, is that it's just a short description of the software. And the, you know, the number one purpose of JOSS is to enable citation credit to be given to the authors of that software. So a little bit more on you know, what we were sort of thinking about in the format. You know, we wanted a short paper. We wanted people to just give a very short description of what the software does, but that description is designed for a non-specialist audience. We asked for a clear statement of need that really illustrates why the software exists, what problem it's trying to solve. Then standard stuff like, you know, financial acknowledgements and financial support, references, and that kind of thing. Crucially, JOSS does not permit novel results to be published in the journal. We do not review for novelty, impact of scientific results. That's not what our review is about. Our review is about the software and the quality of the package. So I thought I'd just go briefly through what the submission and review process looks like, just to illustrate it. Maybe some of you have seen it, but for those of you who haven't, hopefully this will be useful. So this is a kind of visual representation of the flow, but you know, people write a paper, a short paper in Markdown, they submit it to a website, we go through review. I've got a weird formatting issue there, sorry, I'm not sure what's going on. That review and iteration happens in the open on GitHub, and then we accept and publish the paper and issue a DOI and declare victory. What that looks like in practice is, this is the website, this is the front page, so this is from a few months ago. We published our 1000th paper about a month ago, and so here's, you know, here's the front page. People submit, they give us a little bit of information about their software, they suggest an editor, they say that they will adhere to, you know, code of conduct, and that's about it. They then click a button and we end up on GitHub. So very quickly we end up in the open in this repository, the JOSS reviews repository, and we're away. So we have a sort of two-stage review process for JOSS. So the question is, would people submit Markdown or PDF? People submit Markdown and we compile the PDF on automatically as we go. So we'll see that now. So when the paper's first submitted, this issue is opened by Whedon. So this Whedon is actually a robot. So this is an important thing to realize. Whedon is not a human. Sometimes people get a bit confused about that. So that can be amusing when that happens. So Whedon says, you know, hi, I'm a robot, and yeah, if you understand why JOSS and Whedon are two words you would put together, then you might enjoy this. I'll tell you afterwards why Whedon's called Whedon, if you don't know. So Whedon can do things like Whedon compiles the paper on the fly, so that's happening. And at the bottom of this page, you can see the proof, the article proof is there. Whedon can detect programming languages. And then at this point, one of our editors on rotation, so it's Kyle this week, tags a couple of our editors and says, can you take on this paper? Lorena here says, yep, I'll take this one. And actually the author here is suggesting a couple of people who might be good reviewers. Kyle here assigns Lorena as the editor. And then Lorena is asking, so in fact, Gavin Douglas says, yeah, I'd be interested in reviewing this. So we get that, thank you. Lorena is assigning Gavin as the reviewer here. And whoever this Girola also says, I'm available if needed. And so Lorena assigns them too. And then before sending it out for review, so we're still in the sort of let's find reviewers, then let's get going. Lorena's doing a couple of additional checks, so Whedon knows how to check for the quality of the references in missing DOIs, that kind of thing. And then Lorena says, right, let's start the review. So that happens. So Whedon is asked to start the review and opens a second issue. So there's 2 issues for every paper in JOSS. And the first one is like the clearinghouse where everybody, where everyone kind of meets each other, and then the review happens later. So here's the review happening now. So now we've got a little bit more information. We already know who the editor and the reviewers are. So that's included there. And then each reviewer has their own checklist to work through. So everything in this checklist, there's an associated documentation that says, what do we mean by authorship? What do we mean by API docs? What do we mean by, whatever? There's a whole bunch of criteria. Every reviewer gets, I think, 20 checkboxes, and they need to go through this quite formulaic review, but it generally raises lots of issues that get opened on the repo, and so you can see some of those are cross-linked here. And so anyone can ask Whedon to compile a paper, because sometimes the editor will ask for a change to be made, or a reviewer will ask for a change to be made. Here's the author has presumably made some changes, asking Whedon to generate a new proof. And then we're getting towards the end here, so now we're getting to the point where we're saying, okay, I think we are, often the software gets bumped to a version during the review. So they're capturing that here. Then we take an archive of the software. So we take a copy of all the source code and ask the authors to deposit it into something like Zenodo. So we do that. And then the last step is the editor tagging the editors in chief to say, I think this is ready. So now, confusingly, another Lorena, but this is Lorena Barber now, who is one of the editors in chief, who is on rotation, is stepping in, is doing the kind of final checks on the paper, does this kind of pre-flight check, and then does this deposit equals true, which actually is the deposit. So and so the knows how to tweet. Whedon tweets a link to the paper, and this is all done online. So just to be clear, this last post here is really, the paper is really published. The paper is really we're done. So nothing happens offline. It all happens in the review thread. And so actually a couple of good questions here. So somebody said it'd be interesting to make it a cookie cutter for new journals. So there are multiple versions of JOSS. There's the Journal of Open Source Education, which actually is targeting educational resources, educational software that uses exactly the same infrastructure. So Abby, that points to your question as well, I think. And the other thing to say is that we're definitely interested in exploring how to reuse the tools across other journal environments. So I can talk more about that in the Q&A later. So then the managing editor says, thanks for your time, everyone. This was great. And upon closing the issue, Whedon says, okay, congrats, well done. Gives everyone a link to embed the badge in their README on their project, and actually this is the paper is published, it's online, and it's available. So Whedon is a kind of a big part of what we do. Whedon kind of is what we're sort of calling sort of a chat ops publishing, where there's a bot that's interacting with the editorial team. JOSS really should be thought of really as the bot on a GitHub issue, facilitating the whole process. So we've got lots of docs, authors, editors, reviewers. Everyone can interact with Whedon. Different people can do different things. So not everyone obviously can accept the paper. The author can't publish their own paper. Only editors in chief can do that kind of thing. So there's limitations on what people can do, but it's a pretty important part of what we do. So just to kind of close out, just a few kind of general comments about where JOSS is at as a journal. So we're in our 5th year of operation, and we paused submissions in for most of March and most of April. due to COVID. So, you know, we're publishing a lot of papers, a little over one a day right now. And yeah, we published our 1000th paper last month. And, you know, we expect to be publishing something like 500 papers per year next year. Some observations, just for because I think it's kind of interesting to sort of reflect on what's happening at the journal. You know, at a basic level, we feel like the journal is working. It's meeting a demand that really exists. You know, 1,000 papers published definitely speaks to some real need in the community across many communities. You know, JOSS is for many different research disciplines. And, you know, broadly speaking, people seem to enjoy editing, reviewing, and being reviewed within JOSS. And so, you know, people, I think there are some barriers for folks who maybe don't know GitHub, for example. I think this is a good summary of what it's like. It's intense and it's interactive, and it's quite specific often. And so think of it like giving a seminar and answering questions. And you know, it's transparent, it's very collaborative, and really, you know, when it works great, when it works well, the whole experience is one where it really feels like everyone's working together to improve a piece of software, which is a really really great feeling. People generally we didn't like the robot. It does confuse some people occasionally, so there's a little bit of frustration very occasionally, but you know, Whedon says I'm a robot, you know, you can ask me to do stuff, but of course people don't read the docs or read what Whedon says typically. But generally we think Whedon's a pretty important part of what we do, and we're not really I think it'd be very hard to run the journal without the bot. Like any of you who've sort of been involved in trying to scale a project or a community, most of the challenges we have as a journal are about scaling sort of people processes. You know, some weeks we will get 20 papers submitted in a week. Everyone's a volunteer. It's hard sometimes to run what is effectively, you know, a relatively high throughput journal now with purely volunteer labor. So that's a challenge. But we've got some ideas about how to improve both the sort of sustainability in terms of people, like for editors and reviewers being involved, but also how to be better at, you know, asking people to volunteer to review, that kind of thing. And we're actually doing some work on that right now. Just a couple more slides. Some unexpected consequences of working openly. Again, in case it isn't clear, everything I showed you in that review is open to the world. There's no privileged information there. So, you know, one thing that does happen is I'm aware that some people watch that GitHub repository, which must be quite an intense experience because there are like 170 papers under review there right now. And so, you know, getting all those GitHub notifications must be challenging. But we sometimes get emails from people who say, I should have reviewed this package. Why didn't you ask me to review? And we're like, I don't know, I'm sorry. You know, so we get cranky reviewers who weren't reviewers sometimes, which is kind of amusing to me. We generally have a pretty high acceptance rate with inviting people to review. So I would say it's sort of roughly 2 invites required to find 1 reviewer, which is pretty good. We have 2 reviewers per submission. One thing that we have witnessed is for very high profile authors, so I would say sort of vanity software packages, they're not really vanity, it's a vanity experience for the reviewer. For example, Hadley Wickham is a kind of very well-known name in the R programming language. And and he submitted a piece of software to JOSS, and I think we had like 30 people volunteer to review, and because everybody wants to review this piece of software. So we do, that's obviously not fair to the authors, so sometimes we have to kind of police that a little bit. Michael, I will share the link to the sign up. If you go to the JOSS website, it's there as a link to volunteer to review, but I will share that link in a minute. So some other awesome things about working openly, this zero privileged information in the system means that we have to be really good about making the editorial decisions clear. People have to declare that they're not, they don't have a conflict of interest. They do that publicly. We're very clear of our expectations of authors. It reduces complexity in terms of what you have to build. And it actually allows people to say, hey, here are some reviews I've done. So it actually produces public artifacts for the reviewers to link to some of their other work. Some not so awesome things about working publicly is, again, the zero privileged information. So one thing that can happen, a couple of things, we sometimes find that authors will chase reviewers and editors. If you and I write a paper tomorrow and send it to a journal where we have no visibility into the peer review process, if you don't hear back for 3 months, you're probably not going to think too much about it. Because the author is in the review with the reviewers and the editor, as soon as the review is in, sometimes authors are really excited and they'll be like, hey, like, what are we doing next? Like, when are we going to publish this thing? And of course, that's only hard especially hard on editors who have to do extra work. Another effect is, good reviewers can become well known in the group, in the community, and so sometimes that leads to reviewer burnout. There's also, I recognize, potential cultural barriers and potentially negative dynamics for junior staff who may not want to review in a non-bind, non-anonymous environment. I'm not too sure what to do about that. We have a code of conduct to try and enforce, the standards that we would want to see with all of our community, but I recognize that it's almost certainly a barrier to some. So the last kind of point I would make is, fundamentally what we're trying to build in JOSS is a collaborative journal, which is an experience where authors and editors and reviewers are all working together to create great outcomes for all of science. And so thanks for your time.